Welcome to our Let's Talk. Our session today, Indicators of High-Quality Family Engagement in QRIS and Continuous Quality Improvement Systems, Connecting Research to Practice. I'm Deb Mathias from the BUILD Initiative and the Director of the QRIS National Learning Network. Before we begin our session, I'd like to thank the Alliance for Early Success and other generous funders for making this learning community possible. We began this series for state quality administrators and leaders to support their essential work within states around early learning systems building. We have colleagues registered from over 20 states and territories. We intentionally keep the sessions small to invite conversations and sharing. We hope these calls will help us to illuminate challenges, innovation, and promising practices. Make sure to keep track of all your ideas, questions, and examples, whether in the chat box or through discussion. We have the perfect size group to hear what's on your mind. You can enter ideas in the chat box, and we'll have opportunities throughout the Let's Talk session and open the mic and engage in a conversation. Well, as you all know, family engagement is critical and an integral component of high-quality early childhood care education policy and for programs helping to support children's learning and development. BUILD was excited to see the indicators produced by the National Center on Parent, Family, and Community Engagement, and today we look forward to discussing how to incorporate them into quality assurance systems, whether in standards or in the CQI part of the work, in line with the Parent, Family, Community Engagement Framework for Early Childhood Systems. You can see our objectives for the session today. And here's our agenda. We'll do a short introduction, a review of the framework, overview key indicators of family engagement. We'll have a little state sharing and provide some state examples and how states are using the indicators. Then we'll have some resources and closing thoughts. We're really psyched you're all here on a Friday afternoon. And I'd like to introduce our speakers today, our Sparks. Monica Ramos is a developmental psychologist. Her research focuses on early care and education programs, specifically parent engagement, assessing the quality of parent-teacher relationships, understanding and measuring cultural sensitivity and parental empowerment, and conducting evaluation of early education and care interventions. We'd like to also welcome Nancy Darling. Nancy brings over 30 years of experience in the early care and education field. She's been a child care provider, a business owner, a teacher, education manager, director, and is now involved in the as a technical specialist for Early Head Start and Head Start. She's provided professional development and technical assistance to diverse projects and that support family engagement and school readiness for children in Head Start and in child care programs. She's now a senior training and technology assistant specialist for the National Center. Well, without talking further at this level, let's really get into the heart of the matter, and I'd like to turn it over to Nancy to get us started.
Thank you, Debbie. And I just want to say thank you to BUILD for inviting us, the National Center on Parent, Family, and Community Engagement. We're really excited about the resources that we're developing to support you in your work. And today we'll be reviewing two of those resources, in particular the Parent, Family, and Community Engagement Framework. We'll do a review of that, as Debbie mentioned, and then dive a little bit deeper into the key indicators for quality, the key indicators that can help you develop your QRIS systems related to family engagement. So first we want to get to know a little bit more about you and who's here. I know Deb said that there were over 20 states registered. If you could just write in the chat box just the state that you are calling in from. That would be very interesting. I see Montana, I saw Michigan, oh boy, Massachusetts, Tennessee, North Dakota, Missouri, West Virginia, Michigan again, Maine, that's where I am. Hi, Susan. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. So we really are attending today from all over the country, which is really exciting. And we know from our work that all of the states are in different aspects of development in their QRIS system, in their understanding of family engagement, their implementation. There's just a lot going on everywhere. So I really would like to emphasize that we would love for today's presentation to be more of a discussion than a presentation. We'll share information, but then we have opportunity to hear from you. So don't be shy and let us know what you think as we go through this presentation today. So I'm going to also now put up a couple more polls to help us learn more about who we have today and where you are in a few different aspects. So the first poll is, what is your role? And the things you can choose from here: QRIS Director, Quality Improvement Specialist, Child Care Administrator, Resource and Referral, Head Start Collab Director, Researcher, or Other. So if you can, I'm looking at the poll and I'm not seeing a place that you click on there. I don't know how you're seeing the poll.
Yes, that's the same with me. Jonathan, it looks like we've already closed it or something. Is there a way to go back? To open the poll up?
We have 100% other.
There we go. Yeah, on number 7, yeah.
Well, let's just jump to the next one, and if we...
or I have an idea. How about if people put it in the chat box?
Excellent.
Let's get
just
a sense of the
what
role.
Your role is, yeah, and we'll look at that.
Yeah.
Perfect. We always figure it out, right? Head Start
That's
Collab
early childhood.
Director, QRIS Program Manager. I see everything that was on that list: Child Care Administrator, Researcher, Director of Program Quality, Validation Manager, CCDF State Administrator, someone from Launch. So pretty much everything we had on that list and a few other things. So again, we have a wide variety of perspectives here, so I think it'll be a very rich discussion about the use of these indicators. Now this one does have little bullets that you can click on. So when you think about your state and its planning, implementation, or use of a QRIS system, where are you? There are some states that still have no QRIS. Some are in the planning phase, beginning that initial implementation, or maybe you're feeling that you're fully implemented with a QRIS system. So if you could click on those buttons, and I'll give you a minute or so to do that, and then we'll take a look and see what the responses are. Okay. I think, Jonathan, do they have to click the little button that says skip to results? On my screen, I'm seeing a slide that's showing almost 77% are saying that they're at full implementation. 15% are in the planning process. 7% saying they have no QRIS, and so far no one is saying that they're in the stages of initial implementation. So that's very interesting. Hopefully we'll have some information to share with you today that will even help you further develop what you're doing, even if you click that you're on full implementation. There's always room for quality improvement. And I see Kelly saying Kansas is in pilot mode, so that's why she chose planning. And then probably after your pilot mode, Kelly, would come the initial implementation, trying it out, seeing what kind of tweaks that you need to make after that. So if anyone has any questions or comments on that, please feel free, as Kelly did, to put it into the chat box. And the last poll that I'm going to share is I'd like to get some idea of people's familiarity with our, what we call the PFCE framework for early childhood systems. So your choices here are, I know it, I love it, I live it every day. The second one is, I have a general understanding of it, but I may not understand it enough to fully be using it. The third one is, I would really like to dive deeper. And the last one is, what is a PFCE? And I'll tell you, we did a webinar yesterday on the framework, specifically on this framework, and we had quite a few who checked the box saying, what is a PFCE? So I found that really interesting. I'll give you just a moment to pick your choice there. And let's see what we have. All right, so we have a number of people, 12.5%, who I know it, love it, live it. That's fantastic. That's always good news for us. 50% with a pretty good general understanding but would like to know more. 12.5% need more, would love to understand it more fully. And again, this is very interesting, 25%, what is a PFCE? So I'll be doing a review of the framework, but I'll just say, you know, we use so many acronyms in this business, and PFCE, again, Parent, Family, and Community Engagement. And as I go over the framework, hopefully you'll get a better understanding of not only what that means, but why is it important? Why do we focus on that? Whoops, I went the wrong way. There we go. So let me jump in and give you, I know some of you said that you really fully understand it. Some of you would like to know more. So we could actually spend many hours, and we do spend many hours going over the framework, but I will give you a brief overview. And again, feel free to put questions in the chat, or if you'd like me to stop and spend more time on anything, I'm happy to do that. And then after I go over the framework, then we'll start our introduction of the key indicators. So let's start with the framework. Hopefully most of you have seen this graphic and are familiar with the graphic, but I'd like to talk about some of the different components of it. But to begin, you know, we all understand that family engagement is essential to high-quality services for all children in early care and education. And we do have research that backs that up, and I won't go into the research now in the interest of time, but we do have one of our resources, which I'll share more information at the end of today. If you go into the framework itself, the booklet that describes the framework, you will find the research on which this is based. So this isn't something that was pulled out of the air. But basically, the framework is a visual guide for understanding how early childhood systems components can be aligned to support early childhood programs, providers, family caregivers, and community service providers. Together, we all work with parents to promote positive, enduring outcomes for families, children, and communities. And you'll see the outer ring around the framework. Equity, inclusiveness, and cultural and linguistic responsiveness are the overarching parent, family, and community engagement aims. The inner graphic in this framework is the program level framework, and then around it are the systems level context in which states operate. So altogether, the framework is an effort to bring a consistent vision for family engagement to the early childhood field. So I'll talk a little bit about each of the components, and you'll see across the top of the program framework it says positive and goal-oriented relationships. Now we know that those kinds of relationships develop over time through interactions among all individuals in early childhood systems and programs, parents, family members, program staff. These relationships are fueled by parents' passion for their children based on mutual respect and trust, affirming and celebrating families' passion for their children. Based on mutual respect, I think I said that one, provide opportunities for two-way communication and include authentic interactions that are meaningful to those who participate them. Often these relationships require awareness of personal biases and the effect of those biases on mutual respect and trust. And when these relationships focus on shared goals for children, providers and families can experience the support that comes from knowing they're all on the same team. So we like to say that that top arrow is the glue that holds it all together. Then we look at the purple column, which is the child outcomes. And we start there, even though it's going backwards, because our ultimate goal is positive outcomes for children, school readiness, and building that foundation that allows for lifelong success. So the child outcomes that are listed there are in line with state and local early learning guidelines, early childhood systems, and programs. They include the outcomes that children are safe, healthy and well, learning and developing, engaged in positive relationships, ready for school, and successful in school and life. And these outcomes are also aligned with the child outcomes in the Head Start Early Learning Outcomes Framework. Then the blue column are the family outcomes, and we specify 7 family outcomes that research has shown promote positive child outcomes. We all know that children develop in the context of their families, and the 7 outcomes that are listed there, research has shown that as families grow and strengthen in those areas, and I'm not sure how well you can see them on this slide, but we do know that those outcomes promote and support and result in positive child outcomes. Then we look at both together, and those are called the program elements. The yellow column are program foundations, leadership, professional development, continuous learning, and quality improvement. And the pink column are the program impact areas. Those are the services that are provided in child care programs. The systems and services that promote strong family engagement and, again, resulting in positive child outcomes. So those 8 program elements work together to promote systemic, integrated, and comprehensive parent, family, and community engagement. In other words, as we like to say, family engagement is everybody's business. Now, around the inner circle, around that program foundation, is what we call the systems components. And this framework shows how early childhood systems components and the program elements can be coordinated to strengthen program quality and promote positive family and child outcomes. These goals are achievable when they're prioritized within and across all systems components and program elements. So there's 7 state and local early childhood system components that all work together on that inner circle. And sometimes you might look at that and say, okay, infrastructure and funding, for example. How does family engagement relate there? Or policy development, regulations, and standards. So as you dive deeper into the framework, you really start to see that family engagement and community engagement are really integrally interwoven into all of those things and are so important in the success of all of those elements within a program, having them be responsive to families and reflective of the families within the program. And then, again, I'll just reinforce that outer circle of the equity, inclusiveness, and cultural and linguistic responsiveness being overarching themes that are woven through every aspect of the framework and therefore every aspect of our work with children and families. So there's the PFCE framework for early childhood systems in a nutshell. And as I said, at the end you'll have information about where you can go to find out more about the framework and what it means to your program and how you can implement it in your program. So I'm going to turn it over to Monica now to talk to us a little bit about the key indicators of high-quality family engagement.
Thank you, Nancy, and I'd like to take a moment to reiterate Nancy's thanks to the Build for hosting us today. I'm very excited to share the work that we've been doing, and I look forward to hearing from you all about your impressions and how you may already be using this or how you may use it in the future. So Nancy, thank you for providing that overview of the PFCE, and I'd like to first start off by saying how these two are linked. This resource, the indicators of high-quality family engagement, are a part of the PFCE framework, especially in that positive goal-oriented relationship. We developed the key indicators document to be used in the early care and education systems. So this resource highlights the key indicators and shares examples of how states are applying the indicators to support high-quality family engagement. At the systems level, the key indicators provides a vision for integrating family engagement across early care systems. They can be used as a guide to understanding the collaborative relationship among parents and early childhood systems, programs, providers, family caregivers, and communities, all of which you've seen in the PFCE framework that Nancy just presented. The key indicators document was developed to inform QRIS, licensing, and professional development systems. Nearly all states have an active QRIS, and most QRIS work with states' licensing agencies and early care and education professional efforts in various ways to support family engagement as a critical, integral component of high-quality early care and education policy and programs for children's learning and development. QRIS can support continuous learning and quality improvement and can be aligned with the indicators by promoting the development of program-level family engagement plans. The 8 research-based concepts referred in this document as key indicators together lead to a high-quality family engagement in early childhood care and education settings. So this is at the program level. The resource is part of a series designed to support early childhood state systems building efforts to advance family engagement. So administrators and programs can choose to use the indicators in ways that best address state context and local circumstances. You can link the key indicators of family engagement to QRIS indicators and standards in any phase of the QRIS development. The indicators may also be useful in informing state policies and system change efforts that increase family engagement opportunities. You can choose to use the indicators in ways that best address families' unique strengths and interests in state context and local circumstances. Next slide, please. Now, the design team of the key indicators had a significant degree of discussion around terminology to use within the document. The indicators are grounded in research and represent evidence-based practices which support strong outcomes. Given the terminology varies across states and local systems, we think it will be useful for our purpose of the discussion today to provide a grounding in our terminology. As you see on the slide, the definition of family engagement, which is included in page 2 of the indicators document, explain a shift from parent involvement, which are focused on activities at the center, to family engagement, which is more relationship-based, that positive goal-oriented relationship. There's also an emphasis on doing for families rather than doing to families. We're doing with families, sorry. And finally, this definition emphasizes a shift from compliance-driven to system-level changes. So we'll continue to discuss research which informed the development of this document as well as additional terminology. Next slide, please. So these 8 key indicators stem from 17 core family engagement concepts which were identified through extensive review of relevant research and state quality assurance effort, which in this review was led by Child Trends. The reviewed research was published in the last 5 years on family engagement and early childhood education. Our research includes studies with African American and Latinos. Some were immigrants and non-native English speakers. We also conducted a review of state quality assurance efforts and drew from work that consulted with parents and other experts. The 8 key indicators selected were ranked as highly important for family engagement among parents and other experts consulted. The research which informed the development of these indicators is regularly referenced within each indicator section. For example, on page 8 of the document, we have the research statement that's on the slide. The research shows when programs provide comprehensive services for families and connect families to community resources they need, children have better health outcomes in young adulthood. The support of a social network can improve parent well-being and increase parent leadership in the program. Next slide, please. On this slide is the 8 indicators, and I would like to begin by defining the term indicators. The term indicators was intentionally chosen. While indicators can be a term used within your state system's early learning guidelines or workforce knowledge and competencies for the purpose of our discussion, the key indicators focus on how programs and professionals approach relationships with families and how families experience these interactions. The key indicators are intended to strengthen parent-child relationships to support children's health, learning, and development. And so for each indicator, we have it organized in the same way. We have a description of the key indicator, including a brief review of the evidence supporting its importance. We have examples of the key indicators in action to support effective implementation of family engagement in programs and other early care and education settings, and we have examples consistent with the key indicators from state QRIS and quality assurance centers. So really grabbing the importance, which is grounded in the research, examples of how the key indicators can be applied at the program level, and examples of how indicators are already being used in QRS and quality assurance efforts. Now, we selected these 8 key indicators from 17 core family engagement concepts, as I previously mentioned. This list illustrates the alignment between the early care parent-family community engagement framework and the key indicators. And together, they provide a cohesive approach to guide early care and educational professionals and families as they design and implement family engagement strategies and activities. Working together, stakeholders can use the framework as a guide to plan family engagement practices that incorporate these key indicators to address community issues such as resources and needs, and to identify the strengths and challenges within the early care education program and system. Next slide, please. So here is an example of one of the indicators. These examples are intended to provide a few ideas for program practice. They represent a range of program-level policies, processes, and activities, and are not meant to limit the innovation or creativity of programs or states. QRS administrators and programs can identify other ways of putting the key indicators into action that might be more appropriate to the context and circumstance within the community and state they are working in. So let's look at some examples presented on the slide for key indicator 4. The program environment sets the stage for first impressions, impacts interactions, and influences families' experience over time. The environment includes the physical space and the emotional and psychological atmosphere in the program. A program's environment reflects the program's philosophy, curriculum, and the cultures and languages of the families it serves. The environment is informed by, affirms, and celebrates all families in the program. A component in many QRIS systems, as well as requirements articulated in the CCBG rule, are around environments that engage families. The examples provided above should be reflected within program policies and practices. These practices may be reflected within professional development for professionals, articulated as elements families can look for when exploring program options, and reflected within program quality requirements. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Monica, if I could just jump in real quickly, too. I think the examples that given here, I think everyone would say are common, and they're things that most programs do and strive to do. But the value of the key indicators is helping move from doing just common sense and what we think is right to intentionality and understanding even more deeply the benefit of that. So I just wanted to add that in, the importance of intentionality.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, and here's one more example. This is the key indicator 7, promoting parents' sense of competence. So parents' sense of competence in their parenting roles is an important factor that can impact child outcomes. Early care programs can design and develop practices and activities that honor parents' knowledge about their children and help to strengthen their sense of competence. These activities can be designed to reinforce family members' ability to support their children's healthy development. Program quality standards can speak to these elements and include a review of them during program site visits. States can also develop self-assessments in order to support programs' reflection of these practices and opportunities to improve and reflect these goals within professional development and strategic planning. And as Nancy just mentioned, this is an example of an indicator that we really want to push and build the work that is already being conducted. We know that folks already have family engagement initiatives. This is an opportunity, an invitation to really move the marker to include families in an authentic and a meaningful way, and to really incorporate their voice in programs. Nancy, I'd like to hand it back over to you so you can start talking about state implementation and sharing.
Sure. This is where we're really going to ask for your input, because we are very excited to hear from you about how you see the key indicators currently reflected in your state systems. And we'd also like to talk about how you think they could be implemented more comprehensively. So those examples that Monica gave, as I said, I'm sure most people would say, yes, those things are happening within our program. So those would be examples of things that you could share where you see the indicators being currently used, although you may not be calling them key indicators. But also then how might they be used more comprehensively? So if you could use chat, or we could also, I think we have a small enough group that we could unmute if people would prefer to just engage in conversation with us. But we'd like to hear if you could identify any of the key indicators that are already present within your state systems, and if there are any you would like to see added. And I'm thinking it might be helpful to go back and display the slide with the list. There we go. Thank you. So you can look at that and either unmute and share or type in the chat key indicators that you see already present within your systems or things you would like to see added. And again, you may not be calling them key indicators, but you may have initiatives or opportunities to do things like ensuring that providers have knowledge of child and family development, ensuring that providers are able to learn about the specific families in their programs, positive two-way communication. So let us know which of those things you believe are present in your systems. Yeah.
This is Deb. One of the things I've been thinking about is it seems like states are making a shift from like a checkbox of asking the program to do a checkbox or demonstrate more one-way communication into moving into this family engagement in a different, more sophisticated way. So people are really kind of struggling to think about how do we move from easily observable indicators of, like 10 years ago, kind of what we were thinking family engagement looked like, into a little bit more robust way of thinking about it. One of the things states are grappling with is how do we help providers assess where they are in their family engagement and identify what would be next steps for improvement in their family engagement strategies. Have you heard from states wrestling with that concept of, are there tools or ways for programs to evaluate their family engagement and then be able to use the results from a self-assessment or a tool to identify things that would be next steps for the program?
Yes, Debbie, I think you just identified the hot question. That's one of the things. Yes, one of the things we hear the most is how do you measure successful family engagement? So I think the key indicators could be one way of helping to answer that question, but and again, that's a whole nother days of presentation we could do on how to measure. I'm sure people have that question, and let me see, I'm seeing some things coming up in the chat. Massachusetts is in the process of aligning several frameworks, including the PFCE framework, into a statewide family engagement. And you're not the only state. I know of several others that I'm aware of that are doing the same thing, Amy. The draft statewide, she just crossed that part off. The draft statewide family engagement framework has been used to develop a QRIS expectations for family engagement. That's interesting. Yeah, again, that intentionality. We're currently working on building out the guidance and verification for these expectations. So I'm thinking by verification, you partly mean how to know they're being used and how to measure the success of that use. Indiana has a self-assessment for programs and then set goals for areas of growth for next year, with many of the key indicators included. Excellent, excellent. I'd be curious, Beth, when you say the key indicators are included, are you saying because you recognize the information that we have in the indicators, or you specifically used this document of key indicators? You can unmute or you can just type if you want to respond to that. I've seen several states that have really developed some fabulous family toolkits. Yeah,
yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, great. This is Beth Barrett from Indiana.
Hi, Beth.
And I was starting to type, but I realized it probably would be easier just to talk.
Thanks.
No problem. Our toolkit was actually done before the framework was done, but we were actually one of the states that were part of the group that worked on it. So it was great to align them, and there are some indicators that were not included, so we're working on that now.
Oh, okay, excellent. So you were in on the ground level of helping contribute to the development of this. That's excellent.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm familiar with Indiana's toolkit. You've done some fabulous work.
Oh, thanks.
I'm curious if there's anything else.
Do you have that? Does Indiana have the self-assessment tool posted?
We do. It is on.
Would you be willing to send a link or post the link in the chat box? Thank you.
I can do that. Not a problem.
That was a wonderful idea, because I see one of the valuable benefits of this type of a presentation is the sharing that can take place amongst the people who are participants. As we all know, we get so busy in our own work, we don't often have time to talk together or hear what someone else is doing. In fact, that's one of the questions we get most often is, can we please get examples from what other states are doing? So anyone who wants to share, please jump in.
I'd like to add a little bit to Debbie's point about states that are moving from easily observable indicators to these indicators of high quality that may be a little bit more difficult to measure, and a little bit more about how we think about family engagement. And one thing I like to point out about the key indicators of high quality family engagement is if you look at them closely, you will see that there's a mix of different ways to think about family engagement. We have in the first indicator knowledge and the second indicator knowledge. We have the third indicator is two-way communication, which is the interaction between the provider and the family. Fourth one is the environment, which can be a checklist, yes, making sure that there's certain things in the environment. 5 is activities. 6 is attitudes, and this is something that we don't usually see in QRIS indicators. This is the provider's attitudes that foster respect, flexibility, openness to change. And then 7 and 8 can be attitudes or practice. One thing that I really see the field in general, family engagement, whether it relates to QRIS or researchers and other people who have interest in family engagement, is that we're just now starting to really disentangle what we mean and clarify what we mean by family engagement. So family engagement, as the PFCE framework shows, can happen at many levels, but how we think about family engagement in terms of attitudes, practices, environments can be really different. Now, a way to really assess where centers are in terms of family engagement is getting families' input and feedback. And so that means that you have to sit down with families and know, or use surveys that collect information about families' needs and families' attitudes and providers' attitudes about family engagement, and also what the providers know and what the centers are doing. So I'm not sure if I just made the conversation more complicated, but I just wanted to point out something that we're all struggling with.
I think that's great, because one of our upfront questions was about, how do you measure or think about, about that question. Are there surveys that you guys are aware of that to use with providers? I know a lot of states have crafted their own family surveys that providers could use. Are there any out of the center or the national level that, and maybe Head Start has an example of one too on the ELCTA site, but do you have examples of surveys that folks have used? Or
Sure.
I think that there was one by OPRE, right? A set of surveys. But go ahead, Monica.
Yes, I believe you're referring to the Parent Gauge, which was developed specifically looking at the PFCE framework. There are also other surveys that focus on a comprehensive view of family engagement. For example, the FPTRQ measures is the Family Provider Teacher Relationship Quality measures, and that's just one part of the family engagement, is looking at the quality between the two. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overtalk you.
No, you're not. And I can see people posting examples in the chat box, and some links and resources, which we really appreciate.
I also wanted to note one more thing, in that when we were working on the indicators, identifying them, this was a question that we had too. We're like, okay, we're going to make these suggestions, and then I know people are going to ask how to measure it, because everybody agrees with these concepts, but we really want to see how to put them in practice and to measure the progress. So the National Center for Parent, Family, and Community Engagement, we are working on a scan of measures that align with these indicators and align with the PFCE framework. It's a really big task, and we identified about 150 measures, potential measures. So what we're doing is we're going to include the information up in stages. In the next month or so, we'll be posting an Excel database to the PFC, to the eClick website, that has organized lists of measures at different levels and sort of like different tiers of family engagement, whether it be the system level, the program level, the family and provider relationship, or the parent's experience of family engagement, and then also ones that align with the PFCE framework. Afterwards, we will slowly include profiles of measures, which kind of give here's the background information on the measure that may be useful for you to decide whether the measure it works for your community. And all the measures that we're including have already been validated and have been shown to be reliable for diverse populations as well. And some of them have Spanish translations. We haven't found too many surveys that are translated into other languages as well.
We did have another
I'd like to point out,
go ahead.
There's a comment and a question in chat, which also relates to something you said earlier, Deb, too. I think a program can have all these indicators in place, but how do you measure the effectiveness on families' lives, goals, and outcomes for their children? Are there formal measurements out there? And again, that's not a simple answer. It's a complicated question with complicated answers. In fact, we have several presentations that speak specifically to how to measure family progress, how to measure the effectiveness of your efforts. So I would say hold that thought for a moment, Brenda, because we're going to go into another discussion in just a moment, and hopefully we'll hear from some others their thoughts on your question. It's an important question because one of the things that we talk about in our National Center is really understanding the difference between our effort and the effects of our effort. And it's very simple to measure our effort. How many times did we do this? How much of this did we get? How many responses did we get to a survey? But it's not as easy to measure the effect of your efforts. But the effect is really, I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road. All this effort that I'm making, is it making a difference? Has it been worth it? So hold that thought, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to hear from some others, too, about how they're thinking about that. So I think I'll move us on to the next discussion because it's exactly what we've been talking about, but we're going to go into a little bit more depth. So we've talked about key indicators that you see within your systems, how you might add some or enhance some of them. But now I'd like you to think about, if you include these key indicators, how can you see them strengthening your system? What is the benefit or the value of the key indicators? And there's your question, Brenda, how would you know? So again, this is our opportunity to discuss and to hear from all of you. How would you answer Brenda's question? Those of you who have effective or you believe to be effective QRIS systems or other family engagement integrated systems in your state, how are you understanding the impact of your work? So please feel free to use the chat or unmute. They always say you should wait, I believe it's 17 seconds for people to respond, and when you're on a call it seems interminable. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Some of the areas, I'll give you a couple of prompts here if you'd like. Some areas where you might see indicators strengthening your system could be child care licensing. Could they be applicable in licensing? Could they be applicable in workforce development efforts? Let me just toss those two out and see if we have any thoughts on that. I know you all are deeply immersed in this work. How about professional development efforts for child care providers?
I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the tension between including more indicators in the standards versus including the best and promising practices in the continuous improvement efforts of the system. And when I was drifting into the continuous improvement efforts of the system, I was thinking about, I wonder how states are developing trainers and PD instructors and TA coaches for technical assistance that could support strong family engagement practices and programs, and whether you're seeing a trend in your professional development or technical assistance systems around communities of practices for either teachers or directors, and whether this has risen to a conversation and how it might be showing up in the professional development systems. The other spot that you were making me think about was how might the indicators be reflected in other sets of standards at the state level. For example, how are they reflected in the teaching competencies and in the new NAYC core competencies for practitioners? I'm not sure about the link there. I haven't had time to have a look at that, but it made me wonder that. Or in CDA practice or other sets of national standards, but also the state, teacher competencies. And then I was saying, of course, thinking about the third leg of the stool in terms of family engagement as related to the early learning outcomes in the state, the early learning standards in the state. So I was kind of walking my way around, all the different sets of standards. How are we in our support of PD instructors or coaches, getting them this news within our states and having them think about how to incorporate this information, kind of up and down and throughout the system that we're building within states. So I was definitely on the same wavelength, moving into the how are we reflecting these indicators in the support of our PD folks. And really then it made me think also about higher ed, How are we then taking this to higher ed? So I don't know if others were beginning to wander that loop of, as we get a new piece of information to inform our system building, how we kind of walk it through the systems that we've created already.
Yeah, that's really important, Debbie. I like how you made all those links, because we tend to sometimes put things in their own individual silos and say, okay, here's a list of key indicators for QRIS systems, when ultimately our efforts, I believe, are to strengthen and promote family engagement across the board. And in order to do that, the number one question is to understand why. Why is family engagement important? And, I mentioned in the beginning the research behind the framework, and I just have 3 examples here that research tells us that family engagement plays a major role in children's school readiness. It impacts their social, emotional, and academic competencies. We also know that those positive effects are shown all the way from K-12 and beyond. It's not just an early childhood thing. The other piece of research I have here says that family engagement also improves child-teacher relationships, which I find really interesting, and helps smooth child and family transitions from early education into kindergarten and beyond. So, in order to think about why are we making these efforts? We have to understand the importance, and we have to set the goals. And when you're talking about measuring, how would you know that these things are strengthening your system? You start with setting your goals. We're doing this because we hope to accomplish this, right? How are we going to know that we've accomplished this? So you break it down into smaller components and then find ways that you can measure how you're moving towards those initial goals that you've set, as opposed to just talking in those universal terms of family engagement. You need to break it down specifically. So are we helping providers understand the benefits of family engagement when they go to training through our CCR&Rs, for example, or in higher ed, for example? Is this message being communicated? Kind of comparing sometimes the Head Start approach to family engagement and child care, and I think we're coming closer and closer together. It's always been an essential component of Head Start, and believe me, they're asking the same question: how do we know we're making a difference? How do we measure that? Sometimes in child care, providers haven't had the same opportunity to understand the value of family engagement, or their opportunities to engage with families can be very different. If they're only seeing a child who's being dropped off in the morning and picked up in the afternoon. So again, understanding why is it important, and then how do we build it into a variety of systems in order to strengthen what's actually happening. So I'd love to hear if anybody, we've been rambling on here, you and I, Debbie, if anybody else has some thoughts about this, because this is a really important topic. The indicators are one way of building in these family engagement endeavors into our systems. What else are people doing, and how are they looking at the effectiveness? I think we've stumped the expert.
This is Beth again from Indiana.
Hi.
Mm-hmm. And we've tried really hard to keep ours a voluntary self-assessment. We didn't want the providers to feel like someone else was coming in and trying to regulate them in any other way, but yet giving them tools to help them see what good family engagement is. And our toolkit is set up either they're entering, emerging, progressing, or excelling in the different areas. And so it gives them kind of steps to follow to either increase their engagement in different areas, or, kind of see where they are and where areas of growth might be. And we've got a really good response from that. And I think it's because it's voluntary, and it's not something that somebody else is coming in and telling them what they need to do. They're seeing it for themselves. And then we're providing coaching and support to them to help them along the way. So I think that's
awesome. When you say you've had a good response, how do you measure that response? In the people that are completing the self-assessment and letting you know, or asking for that coaching and assistance?
Yeah, it started as it's actually legislated as a requirement for our pilot pre-K program in the state.
Okay.
And because of that, we were able to work with one of our partners to put it online as an online training. And so their scores are calculated when they complete it online, and we can then tell where everybody is and how many have completed them and all of that through pulling all that data set.
That's a really important point, because one of the questions that I've been hearing lately has to do with the numbers of family child care providers decreasing, which is limiting options for families. And one of the reasons that we hear that happening is a hesitation to engage in a system where they're going to be measured, or the quality control, whether they're going to, have to abide with state licensing rules or have people come in and do inspections and things like that. So when you can help them understand the benefit and the value and how it's, we're not just coming in order to judge you in what you're doing, but participation in these things actually are a benefit to you, can strengthen your ability to be successful at what you're doing. And making it voluntary, I think, is really important in areas that you can do that. Any other thoughts on that? Debbie or Monica, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I was actually going to ask too, for Illinois, you're just talking about how the self-assessments work because of the mode, making it voluntary, but I was also wondering if there's anything about the self-assessment, the content of the self-assessment that the folks really like, since it seems to be working well in your state.
I'd also be interested too, Beth, to know what areas are they asking for the support in?
Mm-hmm.
We're putting Beth on the spot here. She's the only one.
Sorry, Beth.
and I can see that we have another interesting suggestion. And Monica, I'm not sure what you would think of this. Could you backwards map the effectiveness of the provider professional development around the PFCE indicators to the individual progress of families? I think the challenge in that approach is, how are you measuring the progress of families, right? Like, that's the tricky part of that concept. I like where this person is going in terms of really thinking deeply about how you would get to understanding the effectiveness, But some of these things are tough to, to measure, right? I heard your point about surveys informing the services and so forth, but at the state level, how are we understanding the effectiveness of implementing something like this,
So is the question, and I'm sorry, I can't see it, so I'm just trying to understand. Is it how to show when providers receive training that there's movement in these indicators?
Right.
And I think Brenda's asking if you provide training to providers on family engagement, is there a way to track the impact of that training on individual progress for families?
Yes, so I see. And I'm sorry.
Did I get that, Brenda?
I think that's related to the points that I was making about the database that we're going to be including in the eQuick website, that will have measures organized by the outcome, so that state administrators and programs can go to that website and say, okay, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z outcome. What measures can I use to see where we are now and what progresses are made after we implement the family engagement activities? So it really depends on what the program is interested in, and what angle of family engagement, what level, and where they would like to see the progress.
And this actually could, veer off into a whole discussion on data and the different kinds of data. You could collect your quantitative data, but you could also find different ways to collect some qualitative data. Families who are enrolled in a program where a provider has taken specific training, you could ask them some questions, get their feedback. What do they think about the quality of care that their children are receiving? What do they think about their relationship with the provider? Is it strong? Do they see the provider doing things to work on that relationship, to strengthen it, to reach out to families? So again, there's lots of different ways to collect data and then interpret what it's telling you and connect it back to the efforts that you're making.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in Pennsylvania, we tried to field, and someone's on from Pennsylvania maybe, that a state-level survey of all of parents receiving services through state-funded mechanisms, right? So whether you were in early intervention or the state pre-K or in a rated, a quality recognized program, there was a survey trying to get to understanding how the programs were working on the ground for families. And that was a pretty aspirational piece of work. And but it, you know, was one attempt at getting at this question about how are the programs working for families and what could we be doing better, you know, at the state level, which is further removed from the service, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
Now we had a question in our
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, we had a question in our upfront when we asked questions during registration that someone was curious to know how people were including transition practices. What indicator do you see that related to? And it's either the thinking about transitions internal in the program or you know, on to school-based programs or other programs outside of the facility. Where did you, or did that maybe that activity or specific activity could be related to a number of the indicators?
Yes, I would say that activity can be related to a number of indicators, and I can just go through and provide some examples. One indicator that relates to is ensuring providers' family-specific knowledge, so having an understanding of what's going on in the family's lives and what's the goal for involvement in the other programs or in the transitions that are being made. You would certainly need indicator 3, the fostering positive two-way communication, to understand what the goals are and what the provider can do to support the parent and what's important to the parent. And you can, one of the indicators that I like a lot is indicator 5, providing those peer-to-peer activities and other social networking opportunities, because family engagement can, so the provider can learn from the family and the family can learn from the provider, but the family can also learn from other families. And there may be families in the community that have already made that transition or have some advice on how to make that transition occur more smoothly. And then the provider can also advocate for families and make connections to supports and services. And one thing that Nancy and I have been talking about throughout the discussion of this indicators is really taking that next step. We often see programs referring families to services but not doing the follow-up to make sure that the services, the connection has been made and the services are being used to the full extent. So that's one way that we would like the indicators to build on what folks are already doing to get closer to that higher quality family engagement and the supportive environment and the positive goal-oriented connection between the provider and the parent.
I would also say promoting parents' sense of competence and, you know, supporting them in advocating for their children, advocating for their families. When they have that sense of competence and confidence that they're making the right decisions for their children and for their family, then they can advocate for them as they're going through different kinds of transitions. So the indicators really can be infused pretty much in that transition process, all of them, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about it that way, from what's your strategy, and then almost mapping it back to the different indicators that it relates to. You know, that's kind of a cool way to think about it, I think. thank you for sharing those examples. That's very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's always a lot easier to understand the meaning of something when you plug it into specific examples and how might I use it in this situation than just looking at a list and saying, oh yeah, we do those things. So because they're really just applicable in so many situations.
Yeah, and it could help you deepen your thinking about transition if you worked it down the list of indicators and said, how do the plans or supports we're providing to the field in our state, how does transition map to each indicator could help you deepen your approach.
Right. I see we have about 15 minutes left, so the next thing I'd like to do is show you some more specific examples of how the key indicators can be used in early childhood systems. And again, if people have thoughts, comments, or questions or additions to these things, that would be helpful too. So the first one is talking about, I think we probably talked about most of these things in our conversation, but strengthening outcomes for children and families in quality assurance and collaboration with state child care licensing and workforce development efforts. So we have talked about that. As you refine your licensing and as you refine and deepen your professional development for the workforce, the goal again is positive outcomes for children and families. Working with state and community stakeholders to consider ways to apply the key indicators and determine how they might count toward quality ratings, given the different circumstances and contexts across state systems, communities, and early childhood settings. Every state is different. Different communities within states are different. So how can you individualize the use of these indicators? And I think it's important that you're working with a variety of stakeholders, and I would emphasize including parents and families in that list of community stakeholders so they have a voice. Advancing efforts to increase opportunities for children and young families and addressing the barriers to those opportunities. So that's another, that could be a whole conversation right there. How would the key indicators that we've listed be utilized in those ways, addressing barriers to opportunities? Informing state policy and systems changes that support early childhood care and education to engage families in support of their unique strengths and interests. And again, that's another area I would say that families could be directly involved. We're doing a lot of work around parent leadership and advocacy in our national center and looking for different ways that parent voice can help to inform things like state policies and potential systems changes in state systems. And again, promoting early childhood systems building that is in line with the parent, family, and community engagement framework. So as you're developing systems, thinking about changing or enhancing systems, the key indicators can guide you towards some of those really important elements of the PFCE framework, so keeping that in mind. Any thoughts, questions, or comments on those examples? Some of that, I think, goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Debbie, of looking at all the different systems and measures and initiatives that we have in place, and how can we enhance family engagement in all of those areas.
I think that beneficiary voice of families has been a challenge at the state level, for policy and system building level. And I wondered if any of you on the phone have a state level strategy for involving parents that you might share in the chat box. And, I've heard states trying state-level family advisory groups or smaller focus groups throughout the state. And we know Head Start has a good strategy at the local and grantee level for this. But if others have any examples.
I also like to add too, if folks have any anything that they're struggling with around the family engagement initiatives at the state level or in QRIS that they want to present to the group, we may talk about it and try to problem solve together. If that's a good use of the time, we can maybe link to the indicators, maybe not, but I just want to make sure that folks have a chance to talk about their family engagement efforts in their states, any challenges that they have related to it.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, don't be shy. Feel free. You've got 10 minutes of our time here. We're happy to share.
Yes, so we have a whole group of people on the phone that can help to problem solve if there's any any challenge that folks are dealing with.
I think the biggest challenge we've heard expressed so far is the challenge of measuring the effectiveness of your efforts. But what else are people thinking about? And I like Debbie's question. Do you have, how are you involving parents on a state level? And if not, what are your challenges to doing that? I hope we haven't put them to sleep, Monica.
That's what I'm worried too.
I'm wide awake. Come on.
I think for us in Pennsylvania, it was the geography, the time, the kind of the standard challenges of even whether it's at the program level, or county level or whatever, families are tapped and stressed, and, they might feel they get more benefit from engaging at the program level in terms of feedback and their needs, meeting their needs and so forth, than at the state level. And so I think that can be one of the challenges, is the time for engagement, and not only the time, but when do you do it during the day? Is it in the evening, on the weekend? And those are precious moments for families, we know.
Yes.
But because then you also get into the geography question, right? With especially in large states, but really any states, driving or attending meetings or convenings or discussions. So I think there are some of the typical, barriers that we see to engaging families at the state level. But.
And, talking about barriers, Deb, if I could digress just for a little bit, we often talk about the different kinds of barriers. The types that you're talking about, are kind of situational barriers. I don't have the time. It's too far away. My family demands my time and attention. But then there's also, sometimes I call them relationship barriers, or more personal barriers that might have to do with things like, I don't have anything important to say, or who's going to listen to me? I can't, I don't have the power to make a change, so why bother? I've tried before and been defeated, all those kinds of things. And I think, again, some of those key indicators, if you really dive into them, and the one I'm thinking about is supporting parents' sense of competence. That can really be deep. That can be important on so many levels. It's not just making sure we're supporting their understanding of child development and parenting skills, but it can just go down to such deep levels. So I think when you're attempting to engage families in some of these activities, you need to think very carefully about all the different types of barriers and how can you address them in meaningful ways and respectful ways. And on that note, we have just about 5 minutes left. So
let me say this one example from the chat box about engaging at the state level, working with local coalitions to engage families. Again, working with partners that are closer to the families, and might have mechanisms. But if you have any ideas about that, type into the chat box if you've worked with community engagement groups or local coalitions around engaging families. Thank you for sharing that. All right, go ahead. Closing thoughts.
Successes and challenges, those are really good opportunity for discussion there. And I've had the opportunity over this last year to do some work with several groups of parents, and I tell you, when you can sit them down and just hear what they have to say, it's just so exciting. They're so passionate and so enthusiastic and have so much to share about what they need and want and how to support their families and the importance of their families in the community. And I mean, I learn more than I could ever give back to them, and just hope I can take that back and do something meaningful with it. So any opportunity or effort you can make to hear those parent voices is so important. So with that, I'd like to share, well, let me first ask if Monica or Debbie, if you have any closing thoughts, and then I'd like to share some additional resources that we have at the National Center and how they might tie into the key indicators.
Sure, thank you. Thank you again for attending the presentation, and we hope that by exploring the key indicators of family engagement today, that this resource can support your state continuous quality improvement process and inform licensing, QRIS, and resource and referral implementation, professional development, or any program level strategic changes. The framework for the early childhood systems and the PFCE indicators are mutually reinforcing and are intended to be used together as a set within the context for your state. I also just wanted to say, and Nancy, I'm sure you'll go into this more, that we're in the National Center very happy to talk about this resource, the PFCE, but any family engagement questions that that folks have in general.
Yes, thank you, Monica.
I just think this has been a great conversation and really appreciate hearing more in depth and thinking about the work around family engagement in the context of state systems building and helping programs improve quality. This is a good contribution to the discussion, so thank you. But you can, I know you're going to take us home now and wrap us up.
All right. I'm just going to share 3 resources. I think Debbie put a link earlier in the chat box to the CCTA, the Early Childhood Training and Technical Assistance System. If you go onto that site, you'll find many of our resources there that you can download. The ones I will emphasize right now, I introduced did an overview of the Parent, Family, and Community Engagement Framework. There's also a assessment workbook to go along with the framework, and the framework and the assessment workbook together are designed to promote a vision for integrating family and community engagement across early childhood systems. And within this vision, early childhood leaders and stakeholders at all levels can work together to recognize families as experts and valued early childhood consumers. So the assessment workbook helps you really dive into the framework and learn how to apply it and implement it within your systems. There's also, to go along with those, these are both brand new, the assessment workbook and the action and implementation guide. And you can explore the action and implementation guide to find definitions, opportunities for actions, scenarios, and other resources that support the implementation of a systemic approach to family engagement. And the last resource I want to mention is the Relationship-Based Competencies to Support Family Engagement series. And we call them the RBCs. They explore and describe knowledge, skills, and individual practices that early childhood professionals need to engage families effectively in those positive goal-oriented relationships. And the RBCs are, they call it a series because they are broken down by role. There's for professionals that work with families, there's teachers, home visitors, and then for each one of those, there's a set of the knowledge, skills, and practices for the supervisors of each of those roles. So those are three really important resources that you can use to support implementation of the framework and the key indicators. So I would just like to end by thanking everyone for coming, and we sincerely hope that we've given you something to think about and something that may help you in your work, because I'm just always so moved by the passion and the commitment of people in this field. So thank you all for what you do every day.
And I'd like to make one final pitch. We have a community of practice that's forming, and you might have seen the announcement for it with the announcement for this Let's Talk session. If you need me to resend it, please send me an email, and we can get you more information about it. They're looking to having their first convening April, May, and another session early June, and then they're going to meet together during the QRIS NLN conference in New Orleans this summer to take the conversation to the next level and really have some great conversations about this important topic. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Goodbye.